I welcome everyone to this today's conference, people who are here at the meeting room at Egmont Institute, and also all the persons who are connected online. The event will be recorded, and then you will be able to find it afterwards on YouTube if you want to have a second vision of the conference. Now, for us, it's really a big honor to be able to welcome Mr. Loïc De Cannière, who, in the area of development finance, I think it's a living legend. It's maybe not necessary even to present him, but he has an enormous experience, as you know, in what is called impact investments. When he took the lead of ECOFIN, the budget was exploded after a few years. Now it's more than $1 billion. I think, compared to the beginning, he has written a book, as we know, which was extremely interesting. First published in Dutch under a slightly different title, and now it's the book "Future of Employment in Africa," the English edition, which we have the honor to present today. So we will first have a presentation by Mr. De Cannière, and then we'll have some comments by Professor Marie-Hortense Manyama-Madika, who's teaching agricultural science, but who will join us in a moment. Yes, she's teaching agricultural science at the University of Lubumbashi and also has some practical experience in impact investment related activities. So thank you very much, Mr. De Cannière, for joining us.
Okay, thank you for your kind words of welcome. Thank you for attending this book presentation. I'm going to run you through the content of my book, but before I do so, I would like to give some context about why I have been writing this book. So as Eric mentioned, in 2001, I joined ECOFIN, which is an impact investment company. It was very small at that time, a company investing in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and with the purpose to, in one way or another, integrate low-income people into the economic system. That is our purpose. And we do this by, for instance, investing in agricultural...
This meeting is being recorded.
In agricultural businesses, working with cooperatives who work with a lot of smallholder farmers, or in microfinance institutions. And so I started traveling to Africa. Before that, I have been working for a marine engineering company from Belgium, DEME, and I was involved in setting up financing for big infrastructure projects. I worked in Nigeria and Ghana and Tunisia. And so progressively, I became more and more fascinated by Africa, also because of a culture which I appreciate very much, which is a human culture of brotherhood, of conviviality, I think, which is very much contrasting with our mentality here in the Northern Hemisphere. And so I also started promoting ECOFIN and promoting the future of Africa in conferences. But when I was doing so, I sometimes was challenged by the audience telling me, allez, Loïc, fine, but you forget that Africa is a disaster. That's what I heard often. It's lagging behind the rest of the world, and it's corrupt, and it's that. And also people saying, okay, fine, your investment in Africa, but it's a drop in the ocean. It will not help a lot. I'm a macroeconomist from education, and so I started to reflect about these criticism, took some steps back and started studying about Africa, reading economic reports, World Bank, IMF, African Development Bank, whatever, but combine this with my own on-the-ground experiences. I never lived in Africa, but I have been in like 25 countries, traveled very often to the continent, and this was the origin of the book. So I started writing down what I was thinking, and I was mainly interested in the future. We have seen and read a lot of books about Africa's past, and they were very justified and it was good that there were these books, but I think I was missing a bit a view on the future of Africa, and then certainly an economic view on the future of Africa. On top of that, I was a bit annoyed or frustrated by the way our media, our mainstream media, are reporting about Africa. It's very often about violence, about hunger, misery, poverty, and of course, these things are real. I mean, it's of course necessary to report about this news, but there is also much more happening in Africa, in my opinion. It is a very young continent with a lot of creativity, innovation, and I also wanted to capture that side of things in Africa. And then finally, in the book, there is a final chapter which is a bit more political. I've been before in the past ago, chief of staff of the Minister of Economic Affairs in Flanders. So I've also been learned to look at things from a political point of view. And there is a message in the book to Europe to rethink the relationship with Africa. So this is what the book is about. I'm already went through this to my background. Now let me tell you something about Incofin, because that will clarify the angle that I'm using when I'm looking at Africa. So I already mentioned that we are investing in a number of specific sectors. Today, there is an investment portfolio of 1.1 billion. Cumulatively over time, we have been investing 5 billion euros, out of which 500 million in Africa, in 20 countries. We have offices abroad. There is a big office in Nairobi with 15 Kenyans, more or less, who supervise our African portfolio. Let me give you a very concrete example so that it becomes more tangible. This is in the left-hand corner, you see a lady. Her name is Sarah Jubuna. She's Kenyan. I visited her quite recently. She's living on the slopes of Mount Kenya in a small village called Gitare. She's running a small farm, and she took a loan of $500 from a microfinance institution called Juhudi Kilimo. And she used that loan to invest in a battery farm, which you see in the middle on top, 1,300 chickens, which produce eggs, and she's selling the eggs to hotels in Nairobi, which allows her not only to have a fairly comfortable life, well, still modest, very modest, but on top of that, she has the means to finance the studies of her children in high schools in Nairobi. Her children already having a better life than herself. With Incofin, we are not investing directly in this lady, but we are investing in Juhudi Kilimo, the microfinance institution, which serves like 30,000 clients in rural areas in Kenya. Another example about Incofin is this company in Kenya as well, specialized in processing and exporting macadamia nuts. So this company works with smallholder farmers. Most of the time they are coffee growers. They have a few coffee plants, and in the middle of these coffee plants, they have macadamia nut trees. They sell the macadamia nuts to this company, which then processes them, prepares them for export, and they are being exported to the United States, to Europe, to Asia. But to give you a feeling about the numbers, this company works with 15,000 smallholder farmers, so it is a major employer in the region. And on top of that, 1,500 people are working in this company. So this is really quite massive in terms of employment. And I think it summarizes well what we want to achieve. We want to achieve investments in companies that are a multiplicator in terms of job creation, so that people have stable revenue for their livelihoods. All right, that's about Incofin. Let me now talk about the book itself. So when I was analyzing Africa's economy in future, and again, I didn't do this in an academic way. I did it my way, I would say, trying to understand what are the major drivers for the future. I developed what I called a prosperity pentagon. And actually, what I did is I identified 5 drivers for the future of Africa in terms of socio-economic future. I'm not talking about political or cultural future. So it's about poverty, demographics, employment, climate, and migration. And I notice there are links between all these drivers. For instance, if there is no employment, there is more poverty, there is more pressure on migration, etc. And so you can find different links between those drivers. I will now go through each of them, starting with poverty. As a reminder, our world has seen a dramatic decrease of extreme poverty over the last decades. This graph starts in 1990, brings us to today, and then with some projection, World Bank projections, until 2030. In 1990, there were still 1.9 billion extreme poor people in the world. Extreme poverty is a World Bank concept. It means people that have less than $2.15 a day. Of course, it's very technical, abstract principle, but these are people living in the subsistence economy, as you could say. You see that extreme poverty has decreased dramatically over time. Today, we are somewhere at 700, 800 million extreme poor people in the world. But the graph also shows where that reduction took place. So it illustrates the evolution in the various regions. And so the reduction took place completely in Asia. The light brown area here, that's South Asia, which means India and surrounding countries. And certainly this area is East Asia, so it's China and surrounding countries. So we notice that the reduction of poverty over the last decades took place in Asia, not in Africa. Africa is this dark brown area. On the contrary, there was an increase in extreme poverty, so that today, unfortunately, it's very unfortunate, but 9 out of the 10 extreme poor people are living in Africa. Africa becomes the region that concentrates extreme poverty in the world. Let me now say something about demographics, which is probably the most essential driver for the future in Africa. As you know, we are today 8.1 billion people on our planet, coming from somewhere of like 3 billion in the 50s. And according to United Nations, the number of world population will grow until the end of the century and then stabilize around 10 billion, 11 billion, could be lower as well. Interesting thing is, if you now split this evolution per region, which I am doing here. So the same graph starting in 1950, this is where we are today, more or less. This is 2050, this is 2100. And you see that this purple curve is sub-Sahara Africa. This is the evolution of the population, estimated evolution of population in sub-Sahara Africa. So sub-Sahara Africa is the only region in the world where population continues to grow, whereas other regions in the world are seeing a population stabilizing or even decreasing over time. Sub-Sahara Africa counts 1.1 billion inhabitants, will double by 2050 to 2.1 and will triple to 3.4 billion by the end of the century. that has to do with natality, with number of children per woman, which is still much higher than in the rest of the world. Now, why am I interested in demographic evolution? Because as an economist, I'm looking at labor markets, labor force, working age population. Working age population between 15 and 64 years is the population that has the age to work, to have a job. And what we see, this is a graph going from 2000 until 2050. Because of this demographic evolution, Africa will see a growth of its labor force, of its working age population, of 20 million per year until 2050 and beyond, which means every year, 20 million people will come onto the labor market, new job seekers, and that will continue over 30 years. So 600 million over 30 years or even more. It's quite obvious that if those 20 million don't find a job, there is an issue. I mean, we will see increasing unemployment, and we might see other impacts such as unrest, etc. So this is very critical to understand, and in my opinion, should determine how economic policy is being managed over the coming decades. By the way, in Europe, we are 450 million inhabitants in the European Union. That number will decline to 350 by the end of the century, which means that by the end of the century, for each European, there will be 10 Africans, which is a nice proportion. Demography also has a positive side. You see here a picture of a typical Belgian. Is a median age Belgian. Belgians have a median age of 41 years. You're, Philip, you're 40. You look like you.
More or less be male 40 plus.
On the right-hand side, I took an inhabitant of DRC. Median age in DRC is 15 years. So there is a gap, a delta between Belgium and DRC of 26 years. And it's quite obvious, in my opinion, that the young population will know a different dynamics in future than an aging population. I expect that there will be more creativity and innovation with the young population rather than with an aging population. And I will give some examples later. You know this person. Just as a joke, a foundation was created by big Canadian companies like MasterCard, and it's called the Next Einstein Foundation. And what they say is that looking at demographic evolution, and I've been talking a lot about poverty, but in Africa, there's not only poverty, there's also a middle class. There is a middle class of 350 million Africans, which are living in comfortable circumstances, which are well educated. So what they say is that the next Einstein of this world, of world history, will not come from the US or from Europe. He will come from Africa. Found this quite nice to mention. Climate is a very painful dimension. In this graph, you see the evolution of greenhouse gas emissions since 1750, 18th century, until today. And of course, you see that since 1900, there has been an exponential increase of greenhouse gas emissions. And again, what I'm doing here, I split the greenhouse gas emissions according to the emitter, the region of emission. And so you notice that in the 20th century, the biggest emitters were United States and European Union, now being taken over by, this is India, and this is China. China has become the biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. I'm showing this because this dark green line, this small, thin, dark green line is Africa. Africa is contributing today somewhere between 3 and 4% to greenhouse gas emissions of the globe. Historically, so consolidated over time, less than 3%. Unfortunately, looking at who is most affected by climate change induced by greenhouse gas emissions, of course, is Africa. So this is a map showing the darker, the browner, the more affected by climate change. And it is obvious that Africa is the one which is most affected by climate change. That translates, for instance, in soil deterioration. So 10% of the arable land in Africa can no longer be cultivated because it is affected by soil deterioration. It has an impact on grasslands. Grasslands are reducing, which has an impact on livestock, and then creates tensions between people. So this is a very, very sad story for Africa. Finally, migration, always a very sensitive issue here in Europe. And let me start by showing the cover of this book, which created some commotion. It was read by the French president Macron, and he was very worried about it. It is a semi-scientific study about migration from Africa. It's called The Rush to Europe, La Ruée vers l'Europe, where he says that Europe could be facing a flow of migration from Africa, 150 million Africans coming to Europe in 2050. So creating a lot of turmoil. And of course, this kind of books does not help to provide a more objective picture of the migration debate. What is really happening? So, on the left-hand side, numbers from the International Organization of Migration, IOM. We are today in our planet, we have 270 million international migrants. So people who do not live in the country where they were born. And if you then focus on Africa, Africa has 40 million international migrants. So Africans not living in the country where they were born. But then diving more into the numbers, we see that this migration, this international migration in Africa, mainly takes place on African soil, within the African continent. And so what is happening? Congolese from East Congo fleeing the violence of M23 go to Uganda, as an example. On top of that, there is a lot of IDPs, internally displaced persons. Sudan, 10 million or more internally displaced persons. If we then look at the numbers, trying to understand the origin of migrants in Europe, and I had difficulties in finding those numbers, which is rather strange, honestly. In 2020, there were 5 million Africans from sub-Saharan Africa in Europe. This is only first generation. It's not second generation, third generation, just first generation. There were another 6 million from Northern Africa, from Maghreb. So together, 11 million Africans in Europe on a population of 450 million Europeans. So in my opinion, these are rather modest, moderate numbers. And the main thing, which is in my opinion important, is that migration in Africa is mainly an intracontinental issue, not an intercontinental issue. Okay, this is the analytical side of the book. Then trying to reflect about the criticism that I received about African optimism is not correct. You should adapt your view. Well, let me briefly go through some of these elements. In the book, goes more into the details. Of course, there is this colonial past which plays a role, and I describe it in the book, and I'm not a specialist in the colonial past. There are others who know much more about it. What I remember mainly from authors such as Basil Davidson is the colonial period has undermined the nation building that was taking place in Africa. There were a lot of kingdoms and they were evolving to full nations, and that was actually undermined. But of course, the past does not explain everything and does not absolve the present leaders from their responsibility. And also the ruling class often lacks a lot of responsibility in managing or in governing the continent. A more technical side of things is education. There is a clearly issue with education, with failing education, looking at young people age of 14, 15 who followed up to lower secondary education. In Asia, that group, 80% of those young people followed school, were attending school, as opposed to only 40% in Africa. This is clearly an issue. Education is clearly something where Africa should step up. By the way, Jeffrey Sachs has a proposal. He thinks that all boys and girls should attend school. That should be compulsory up to the age of 18. And he calculated how much that would cost to the world community. And he calculated that would be $25 billion. I saw these calculations. I think they were quite correct. And he then compares it to the budget of the US defense, which is $800 billion. And he said perhaps we could achieve more peace by promoting education rather than financing armies. But that's a bird debate. There are obvious issues with infrastructures in terms of unpaved roads, in terms of access to safe drinking water, in terms of access to sanitary facilities, in terms of lack of access to electricity. But my book is also optimistic. Africa has excellent mobile phone networks. I'm often traveling to Uganda. Wherever I am in Uganda, I have 5G, no problem. It is a fantastic connection. Perhaps I'm exaggerating a bit, but in general, mobile networks are excellent and also explains how Africa is leaping in terms of technology and has the ability to leapfrog. Yeah, I'm not going through all these other slides. It's too long. Let me now explain a bit my conviction why I think Africa has the potential to be the continent of the 21st century. But I'm starting from an assumption or starting point, which is essential, coming back to my 20 million new job seekers per year. That has to be solved. I mean, there has to be a solution for the 20 million job seekers flowing into the labor markets every year. I think it's possible, and I will explain how I think that can be done, but it's essential. If this fails, then the future might not be so bright. I have to say something about these job markets in Africa. They are very different from the rest of the world. In Africa, 80% of the people are working in informal economy, either in smallholder farming, family farming, or as a micro entrepreneur, carpenter, metal workshop, whatever. It means 4 out of the 5 Africans have created their own job. They have not been waiting for salary jobs. They have not been waiting for jobs as civil servants in public administrations. They created their jobs by themselves. And I think this is also a demonstration of the creativity and the dynamism of African population. Now, why do I think that Africa has strengths and fundamental strengths? I will first give 2 main reasons, starting again to point at creativity and the capacity to innovate. There is a very interesting professor at the Harvard Business School. His name is Clayton Christensen. He did research with his staff among entrepreneurs in different regions of the world. He came to the conclusion that Africans, and I know we are now talking in general, and Africa is not a country, etc. But in general, Africans have a capacity to innovate, to create their own markets, even if the market circumstances are circumstances of low consumption, circumstances of lack of purchasing power. Still, Africans can create companies that thrive in such a situation. He also observed a high degree of entrepreneurial spirit. That was also confirmed by Paul Collier. He's a professor at the University of Oxford in developmental economics. And he wrote a book, and he, at a certain time, describes the situation in a refugee settlement in Uganda, which then I visited because I read this paragraph, and then I got in touch with Paul Collier. It's a huge refugee settlement with 180,000 refugees, most of them coming from East Congo. People arrived there without anything. By the way, it was a refugee settlement where Kagame grew up as a child. And in the middle of that camp, there is an economic zone, certainly, that emerged from scratch, from nothing. I saw it. It was very, very impressive to see. Then, of course, also the degree or the capacity to innovate. I think Africans are very innovative. Be aware that mobile money is an African invention, was actually the idea of M-Pesa, and has then been taken over by the rest of the world. Then the second fundamental strength, again, is this young population. This young population, for instance, that is highly proficient in IT. I see companies emerging in Africa, young companies in Kenya, in Ghana, in Rwanda, in Nigeria, in Ivory Coast, developing IT services, including serving European clients, not by migrating to Europe, but by working remotely from their country and serving European clients. I think it's very impressive to see. The rest of the world is aging, and this is going to have an impact in one way or another. Might be more labor mobility, but something is going to happen here. And then also this young population is very well connected to media, to social media, is well informed, has the power to put pressure on policymakers to ask for accountability from their policymakers, and that is also a reason for optimism for the future. Let me now briefly, I know these are general statements, briefly go into more concretely, where do I see this employment and these new jobs in future? Where will they come from? Very quickly, agriculture and food is the main driver for job creation in future in Africa. I'm completely convinced of that. Africa is still importing $70 billion of food per year and agricultural projects, which is not necessary at all. They can easily produce these commodities by themselves. Giving an example, the company, the flour mills of Nigeria, which is a big company in Nigeria, flour production, produce flour based on wheat imported from the US. So what the company started to do now is to start producing wheat from locally Nigerian wheat. Very recently, there is a person quite known in Africa, Aliko Dangote, which is a big industrial businessman, just invested in a very big sugar refinery, making sugar imports in Nigeria completely useless. And this is really happening. I see it happening. You see the emergence of a strong agri-food, agri-business industry, and also as a big employer for the future. There is a new economy emerging in terms of initiatives that want to preserve biodiversity, reforestation, etc. Many new initiatives are emerging with a lot of with big employment effects. Creative industries. Africa is, of course, very creative. The creative industries already represent 3% of African income, of African GDP. There's film, there is art, there is music, there is fashion, of course, and it is also obvious that African art is getting more and more visible in the world. It's more and more attractive in big auction houses and fashion houses. Processing of critical raw materials. Africa has a lot of critical raw materials which are necessary for the energy transition, like cobalt, lithium, copper, etc. Until today, most of these minerals are being mined or being transported to the nearest port and are then exported to the rest of the world. African countries are becoming aware that it would be better to process these minerals on African soil. And we see more and more initiatives emerging, replicating a bit the Indonesian model. Indonesia has been able to attract battery companies, car manufacturers to Indonesia by imposing to mining companies in lithium to have local processing facilities in Indonesia. Green energy. Africa has a huge reservoir of renewable energy. Take the example of Kenya. The power supply in Kenya, 90% of power supply in Kenya is coming already from renewable energy. And so the African continent, that has been confirmed during the Africa Climate Summit, has 40% of the world's capacity to produce green energy. IT, I already mentioned, as a major sector, digital sector for future. Tourism and blue economy. The African Union made a study about the potential of tourism and blue economy. The number of jobs that can be created there is impressive. But, and this is of course the message of the book, and I'm closing the circle, the informal economy is going to stay, even if we have massive job creation in all these sectors. Given the 20 million job seekers per year that join the labor force, it will be necessary to still have this informal economy. It will be there in the coming 30 years as well. This is my conviction. And whether African governments like it or not, because it's not prestigious. No? It's more prestigious to open a new campus or a new infrastructure. I think it's still important to also support the informal economy, even if it's not high-tech, even if it is not adding a lot of added value to an economy, but at least it's providing jobs and revenue to people. I'm not the only one to see these new things emerging in African economy. For instance, referring to The Economist, who made a whole article about digital revolution in agricultural revolution as well, becoming the global food powerhouse. African fashion is booming, etc. So I think it's being observed by different observers. I have a chapter on Africa, Europe, and China, but I think that might bring us too far. Eric, I'm looking a bit at the time, otherwise I will just go over that
very quickly.
Very quickly up. Which is actually reflecting the last chapter of my book. Very briefly. So about Europe's African policy after 1960, so after independence in Africa. What happened? I'm drawing your attention to 2018, which was the end of the term of Jean-Claude Juncker. He then launched quite an unusual program which he called the Africa Alliance for Sustainable Investments and Jobs. And it was the first time, I think, that European Commission said, instead of focusing on traditional development aid and budget aid and all these kind of things, let us perhaps focus on investments and jobs. Perhaps this is what Africa really needs. That was then taken over by Ursula von der Leyen and was then translated in 2021 into the famous Global Gateway, which is a big investment program of the European Union for the coming 7 years of 150 billion euros. It's not only European Commission, it's also the money of the member states, and it's also money from financial institutions. It's not really new money, but it's reclassified money with a bigger emphasis on investments, climate, energy, and on transport. Of course, this European policy and this European program is actually a response to what Chinese have been doing since many years already in Africa. Chinese are not inspired by development cooperation. This is not a concept that they are interested in, but they are interested in trade, investments, mainly in investments in mining companies. If you look at the investments of Chinese in African mining companies, it's very impressive. China has become the largest trading partner in metals, commodities, and petroleum, and they have been extending within the program of the Belt and Road Initiative 170 billion euros of loans to Africa for infrastructure projects. Be aware that these loans are at market rates. There is zero concessionality. There's no grant element in these loans. These are pure commercial loans, but they have, of course, contributed to many infrastructural works in Africa. But the consequence of this is that today China dominates the access to most of the critical materials in Africa. Cobalt is a very clear example, and Philippe is much more a specialist than I am. But so the cobalt supply chain is dominated by China from A to Z, and Europe is now trying to provide a response with a global gateway, and this one of the flagship projects of the Global Gateway are the transport corridors, big infrastructure projects like between Cairo and Dar es Salaam, or at the right-hand side, the famous Lobito Corridor, the flagship project of the Global Gateway between the Copper Belt in Zambia and DRC and the port of Lobito. Frankly, of course, I always welcome fresh money for Africa. But taking into account the topic of my presentation in my book, I wonder a bit, what is the contribution to employment? Is this adding new jobs to Africa? Of course, yes, during the period of the works. But I still see a scheme of mine to port, mining minerals and then bringing them to the nearest port and then exporting them, missing a bit the dimension of local processing and, well, anyway, the employment impacts. This being said, Lobito Corridor was not a European idea. It was apparently an idea of Joe Biden, and he has then convinced the European Commission to join that project. In general, we see that Africa is moving up in the priority of geopolitics. It attracts more attention because of the presence of critical minerals. This is the first and the main reason. There is an impact in terms of investment and job creation, which is good for Africa. We see the mindset of foreign powers active in Africa changing, whereas in the past, at least, sometimes African interests was dominating. Today, it's more about common interests, which can be fine, but often also about self-interest. Do I have access to critical resources? what I think that at least could be done better in all these big programs is to make sure African countries are really engaged in the design of the programs. We should avoid, in my opinion, cockpitism. I mean, sitting in a cockpit in some capital outside of Africa and then designing policies. I think the time is there for real partnership and real respect. Very final slide, and then I'm stopping. I'm coming back to my Sarah Draguna. Why? Because I've been talking to, I think, hundreds of micro entrepreneurs and farmers, etc., in the past 20 years. And I summarized some of the statements. Of course, it was not Sarah who was mentioning all these statements, but I putting those statements in her mouth. So I think that the Sarahs that I met are absolutely aware of the big challenges that the continent is facing, but they are also aware there's some self-confidence about being entrepreneurial, being creative, and being very young. They often mention the fact they want to be treated respectfully. And as I mentioned, these policies of foreign powers, in my opinion, is not, I mean, there is room for improvement in terms of mutual respect, let's say it like this. And of course, these people want work. I mean, none of the micro entrepreneurs has ever told me, Loïc, take me back to Europe. No, it was always, how can you invest more in my company so that I can grow it and I can employ more people? I also notice is specific or a remarkable care of the planet, a proximity to nature, which I don't observe here in Europe. And then finally, as I'm an investor, of course, they always welcome investors. So thank you very much. This is in a nutshell the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I just note that at the end it will be possible to buy copies of the book if somebody is interested. I think your overview was extremely clear, very well presented, and I mean it's impressive that you combine a real genuine concern for Africa with with realism and a very acute awareness of what is needed to change things at the bottom. I think we need much more of that. So maybe I can invite Professor Manyonga Madika to give a comment from her own experience on the ideas that were developed by Mr. De Cannière. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor.
Maybe I can just add that you're professor of agricultural science in Lubumbashi,
Yes.
and you have a vast experience in agricultural development in the DRC.
Also. Okay, thank you so much. It's a big honor for me for inviting me to discuss, to share also my experience and also what I get from this amazing book. Yes. So my name is Marie-Hortense Manyonga Madika. I am a professor at the University of Lubumbashi, and also I am a co-founder of a local NGO in DRC that's called CIPAGRI. As a professor of agricultural science at the University of Lubumbashi for 2 decades, having worked with organizations such as SNV, it's a Dutch Holland, cooperation, international cooperation, Caritas International, Belgium Caritas International, Welsinger Hift from with BMZ Fund, and ARES, which is a kind of platform for all the French universities here. And with the Congolese Army, FRDC, in agriculture, I wish to express my profound admiration for the work of Loïc De Cannière. His book, The Future of Employment in Africa, goes beyond a distant macroeconomic analysis. It accurately captures the complexity and potential of the African terrain, particularly the Democratic Republic of Congo. His vision, forged by 30 years of immersions and investment, directly aligned with the concern and hope of the population I have been working with. My commentary on Mr. De Cannière's excellent work is structured around 4 key takeaways that resonate deeply with my own experience. Firstly, I wish to highlight how the book's analysis powerfully validates our own field experience. Secondly, I want to address the Congolese case, which perfectly illustrates the balance between daunting challenges and immense opportunities. Thirdly, I will speak to the critical needs for a convergence between academic knowledges, field expertise, and investment. And finally, I will see the book as a compelling invitation to action and a new type of partnership. So let's go to the point one, analysis that validates field experience. The primary strength of this work lies in that it's based on practical experience and realities. The concept of prosperity pentagon is a powerful analytical framework that mirrors what we observe daily in the DRC. Employment, demography, poverty, migration, and climate are inextricably linked. The conclusion that job creation is the most effective weapon against poverty is not an abstract theory for us. It is a lived reality. The emphasis on agribusiness as the primary catalyst for employment resonates deeply with my experience. The suggestion of commodity-based industrialization is precisely the path we are exploring with our partner. Seeing the idea championed with such conviction by an experienced investor is extremely validating. It confirms that the financing model we advocated for, we SIPAGRI, and which institutions like Equity, BCDC, Bank are beginning to implement are on the right track. Point two, the Congolese case between daunting challenges and immense opportunities. The author is right to highlight the particular Congolese context, often perceived as a call for despair. Indeed, the weight of history, executive institution, and state fragility can discourage even the most optimistic person. Yet, it is precisely here that Loïc De Cannière's perspective is most valuable. It does not merely paint a bleak picture. It identifies real opportunities within the current context. This perspective is rare and essential. My fieldwork, particularly with SIPAGRI, confronts me with the duality every day. In Kinshasa, for example, people often refer to what they call Article 15. It's the art to resourcefulness faced with demographic explosion and a lack of formal employment. The population has developed remarkable resilience. Since 2050, we have observed growing enthusiasm for a wheat cassava plant. And the name of that wheat cassava, the scientific name is Manioc glaziovi. That cassava doesn't produce tuber. And they called it pondu ya caoutchouc in Kinshasa. whose leaves are highly prized as vegetable in urban centers. This increasingly cultivated plant offers significant nutritional and economic advantages, especially for the women who are very active in this value chain and the youth seeking to transform their agricultural activities into genuine businesses. It is a perfect micro illustration of the potential Loïc describes, meeting local food demand by promoting endogenous resources. For the point 3, the necessary convergence of academic knowledge, field expertise, and investment. The book implicitly calls for a renewed partnership. Like Loïc, I believe that viable solutions emerge for the convergence of knowledges. My journey from training 120 military personnel for food self-sufficiency at Bahuma camp in Kinshasa, its ex-combats in Kinshasa, to managing governance program for LFF, a Belgian NGO, has taught me that academic theory must imperatively align with on-the-ground reality. The author advocates for bottom-up approach, and it's indeed the only one that works. One may refer to the failure of large-scale Bukangalozo program in Congo, with millions of dollars being wasted precisely because of an elitist top-down approach, neglecting local realities. I fully subscribe to his critique of corporatism. Too many programs, even well-intentioned ones, fail because they are designed far from local realities. Success requires dialogue with local actors, farmers, processors, SMEs, who hold the key of resilience and innovation. This is the philosophy that guides CIPAVI. Since 2017, we have been working with actors in the wheat cassava leaf value chain. We have connected them with researchers to address their knowledge needs, jointly identified technologies to improve their businesses, and are now linking them with microfinance institutions for access to credit. Point 4, an invitation to action and partnership. Finally, this book is an invitation to action. The focus on financing MSMEs and impact investment is crucial. My experience at RS supporting North-South University collaboration convinced me of the power of networking competencies. The academic expertise of Congolese university, like of Lubumbashi or Kinshasa, is an underutilized resource for designing sustainable and socially responsive business models. Unfortunately, local skills, researchers, development agents, decision makers, civil societies still meet too infrequently to dialogue on a concrete practical pathway with social and sustainable impact. I share the author's vision of the role of Europe could play through targeted investment in a partnership of equals, distinct from the Chinese approach. The DRC, with its immense resources and entrepreneurial youth, need this type of smart partner. In conclusion, The future of empowerment in Africa is much more than a book. It is an enlightened and practical plea. It validates the work of those of us on the ground who believe in Africa's potential despite the obstacles. It inspires me to continue with even great conviction, sharing my academic and practical experience with actors eager to invest with profound social and environmental impact. Loïc De Cannière work paves the way for an essential dialogue. I hope it will serve as a foundation for future concrete collaboration between investors, academics, and African entrepreneurs to collectively transform these promising avenues into millions and tangible jobs. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Professor Malika. Maybe we can, if you agree, we can send your comments to the people who have registered for the conference afterwards. So I think we still have some time for questions. So maybe we can, if there are some questions or comments from people here, we can start here in our room. Questions can of course be asked in English, French, Dutch, German, I don't know, I guess many languages. So
Thank you, Loïc.
yeah.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the vision you express here. I want to challenge you a little bit because very interestingly, you clarify that Africa does not exist. It's not a country, and when people have to understand the diversity. However, you constantly speak about Africa. So in a sense, it's difficult, of course, to bring the nuances. But why do I make the point? So Paul Collier, who actually endorsed your book and you cite, he wrote about the bottom billion. So he says there's a number of countries that are stuck for structural reasons, regardless their potential. I think that's what he would say to you. You talk about Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria. You don't talk about the Sahel, Great Lakes, South African Republic, Congo. So I wonder, how do you relate to this? So that's a fundamental question I have. Does your story hold up in those countries as well, which are structurally disadvantaged? You also cite Jeffrey Sachs, 25 billion, and you can solve education. Sachs is criticized because he doesn't take this into account, that you can pour money in a country, but the teachers will not be paid, the schools will not be renovated, warlords will take the money. So how do you look at this institutional part of your story? Thank you.
So there's one thing I forgot to mention. So if people are online, so maybe the easiest way for asking questions is to write in the chat box, please. So if you have questions, please write them in the chat box. So we can.
That was my first question. The second one, very short. Yes, jobs will come, but will it be decent work? I'm interested in your approach on that as well. Thank you.
So on the first topic, I have been reflecting a lot about whether or not I was in a position to write a book about Africa. But then I thought, okay, I'm an economist. What I see that economists can also write books about Latin American economy or Asian economy. So why not about Africa? And of course, I realize Africa is not a country and it's very diverse. And I also realize, Philippe, that I'm always referring to these same countries, which are like kind of locomotives for the African continent. But that is also typical, I think, for macroeconomists. They will look at what is possible, looking at what the best performers are doing, hoping, and I agree, this is an assumption, that other countries will follow and will benefit from the fallout of these, the positive fallout of these countries. I fully agree, but I always refer to the same countries: Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, etc.
Do you think that the major trends hold up also for this bottom billion countries? As the potential you suggest
I must admit that it's much more difficult. It's much more difficult. Take a country like Guinea, where I was quite often. It's highly problematic. However, Guinea has huge natural resources, bauxite. They have been signing contracts with Chinese also for the iron ore, which are not favorable at all. And there, I think my book hopefully can inspire a bit to say, okay, but at least rethink the way you deal with external buyers of your critical minerals. Yeah. And your second question was
the relation between job creation and decent work.
Yeah, no, but that's for me essential.
The informal economy and,
of course, that's for me essential. Decent work. I'm very much inspired by the ILO approach of work, decent work. It's ILO who came with that concept. And I'm giving an example in the book where, for instance, Ethiopia has developed a export processing zone where a lot of Chinese companies have invested in leather manufacturing with labor circumstances who are probably not corresponding to the concept of decent work. Yeah, I fully agree.
Yeah, I also have a question to ask. We are here representing Team Europe initiative that actually works on opportunity-driven skills and that in Africa. And what does it mean? We actually start from these new investments in the global gateway to which you related, and these new emerging industries, what they create in terms of potential of local employment potential locally. And we try to focus on local training, which is flexible and that replies directly to these investments so that their human resources locally can be sourced locally by also taking into account the businesses that partner with these big investments, etc. Now, indeed, your points also were really very relevant about the corridor approach, and I would like to hear your take on the approach of our program, how it could be beneficial, and what potential attention points could be. Because you were talking, for example, about bauxite in Guinea. We are specifically supporting a partnership of a refinery.
Okay.
That it will focus on refinery of bauxite into aluminium locally.
Okay.
And we will also support alignment with the industry of the creation of a center of vocational excellence there, so that the local population can contribute to this refinery, and also the local subcontractors can be reinforced to also contribute to this. But it still remains a domain, like you said, that is also open for a lot of criticism. And yeah, I would like to hear your take on this.
Yeah. I'm not criticizing the corridor approach, and more in general, global gateway. I mean, I once heard Koen Doens explaining that the European Commission decided to go for big projects because that was concentrating funding to big infrastructure projects rather than spreading it around in hundreds of projects. I can understand that approach, and so I think it can make sense. I have seen cases where corridors have been very useful. I remember when I was in Nigeria, the corridor was built not by European or by the Nigerian government between Lagos and Abuja, Lagos and Ibadan, created a lot of employment and small companies along this corridor. So I fully appreciate that. I must say I'm more skeptical about the Lobito corridor in the sense that, in my opinion, it's still a bit the old concept of mine to port approach. On top of that, I'm a bit surprised that there is a company like Trafigura involved in this project, which we know is, I mean, we can at least question the practices of that company in terms of transparency. But I think it's very good that you take this initiative to work around and develop initiatives of training, vocational training, etc., around this project. That is very good. I must say, I'm also involved in the preparation of the G20 in Johannesburg, and there was a text prepared by the B20, the Business 20, which advises to the G20. And there was, at a certain point in time, also about big infrastructure projects, and they said, okay, we need to involve local subcontractors in the big infrastructure projects. I'm not sure that is so realistic. What I was missing a bit in this approach is next to the big corridors, you also need infrastructure up to the last mile. And this is what I'm often missing a bit. Like cold chains should go until the last mile. Water supply, for instance, should not be limited to providing big water supplies in cities, but also last mile to small municipalities, as India is doing, by the way. So India is also an example of can provide also good examples. So
and what do you mean by the subcontractors that they should also involve further into the value chain?
I think it's great if local subcontractors can work with big international contractors.
But they should also, yeah.
But is it realistic? I mean, I've been working for a big international contractor. I know what it means on the ground, and I don't think it's always working very well. So what happens is that the big contractor will use its own people. And I mean, it's fantastic if they use
stimulate the other.
Yeah, no, if that happens, it's fantastic.
Okay.
I fully agree.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm very pleased to have the chance to hear you. Having lived on the continent for almost 2 decades, I should say that I'm sharing most of the statement that you're making and your optimism for the future, though the picture is much more nuanced indeed. I will be curious to hear how you see the potential to unlock local capital for more investment.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you for the question. I'm very enthusiastic about unlocking local capital. And I think the time has come to do that now, and it's happening. But again, I'm going to refer, to Nigeria and Ghana are the two countries where you see this happening now, where you see, and Uganda and Kenya as well, where you see pension funds starting to develop local funds. I have been talking to my own teams at Incofin saying perhaps the Incofin model is outdated. We are Europeans investing in Africa. Perhaps the time has come to rather support African vehicles with African money investing in Africa, with African fund managers, etc. Yeah, but it's starting. So I was at a conference in Ghana in May. It's called Impact Africa Impact. I don't remember. I was amazed to see what is happening, and it wasn't there 5 years ago. It's completely new, and these are big amounts and big companies, pension funds, etc.
And do you think that these trends will also unlock much more risk-averse global investor?
Well, at least they have a better view on the real risks. Yeah. Yeah. But again, I'm not talking about Mali and Chad and sorry,
No,
in Central African Republic.
I just asked question because my interest goes up with those countries, the really the bottom, the fragile countries. I really appreciate nevertheless your analysis.
Yeah, I think there was a question of a gentleman.
Sorry, I came late, so I missed part of it. I'm not an economist, but you touch on several points. I will try to go straight to the points, trying to remember some of the things that you touched upon. But my fundamental question is, when will Belgians and Europeans move away from 8084, 8085? Because with the corridor and everything that you presented, to me, from my economy background of studies, etc., is still we go, we did, we should have. And if that's the model that's been in place forever, because there was one slide with slavery, 80 million, and then I think colonialism. But I've not seen neo-colonialism. That's out of there. It's like after the independence, so-called independence, it was over. We you as Europeans still have interest and pushing the agenda with the money and talking about partnerships. So let's have a real conversation. Okay, so the partnerships, and there was another slide that you shared about Belgium, the real Belgium and the Congolese. I'm tying both because it seems like the youth of the world is in Africa, but the youth in Belgium is in everyone else too. But the image of Belgium is youth. That for me is problematic too. So when I'm tying both, my question to you will be in terms of employment, because that was I think for me, the main topic that your book was talking about. If we're still operating in the 80, 84, 80, 85 model, do you realize that Africans, I've not been on the ground for many, many years, so I'm not talking about it, but do you realize that the people are not waiting for you anymore and they have friends who are no longer interested to travel to Belgium and France and go everywhere else? So you're talking about China, it's not China alone, right? So my point of view, when I'm challenging your view and your team's view and maybe your worldview is Africa will be fine. I will not see it, but Africa and Africans will be fine. I'm not sure that you will be fine. And this is making tensions also in policy, because I'm finishing with this. France has a paper, I think, from the Senate saying the future of France depending on Africa. So what does that mean for the young African 15 years old that you share on that picture? So thank you. I mean, I've been all over the place, but you touch upon me.
All right. Okay, let me share my most profound conviction, which is on this slide. What could we do better? And I think I've been on the ground many times, talked to many Africans. There is a willingness from both sides to work on a partnership, but it should be authentic, it should be real. And I fully agree with you. Let us not go back to 1884, 1885. Fully agree with you. And sometimes there are like dimensions which make us think of neocolonialism. Certainly when it's about minerals, I fully agree with you. But my conviction is, let us please look for cooperation where this is respecting the other party, but also seeing the benefits for both parties. And I don't see what would be wrong with that. This is my strong conviction. I think that's, in a nutshell, my answer. I fully, yeah.
I think, thank you for your presentation, and thank you also for your brilliant presentation. I want to agree with gentlemen right now here, because I think the global getaway I've been attending to last week. It was even here organizing the global getaway, Team Europe.
Yes, we were not there.
Team Belgium at that time. But this is, in my view, this is an answer to the Chinese offensive, offensive and diplomatic offensive in the world, especially in Africa. When we see these corridors mentioned, many of them are not actual anymore. I missed this conversation last week. I wanted to exchange with the speakers, because when we take the situation, the geopolitical situation in Africa right now, this corridor, Ghana, Abidjan, Ouagadougou, the corridor Abidjan, Ouagadougou. We see since we have this political situation, this corridors is not anymore used. The main business is done with Togo. We have Lomé. So I think we should, it's not anymore actual. But what I want to say that is what gentleman said. I'm sure also, I agree with you that Africa will be fine. For sure, we know the potential of this continent. We know the potential of the young people in Africa and around the world, the diaspora as well, as we are. So my question is, did you take in consideration the potential of the diaspora on your presentation? If what do you think about it?
I have a lot of contacts with the diaspora. I'm a member of the Brussels Africa Hub. You might have heard of it, chaired by Mukhtar Ba from Guinea.
Yeah.
And of course, he is very much promoting the contribution of the diaspora to financing investments in Africa. And they are launching, by the way, a fund that is going to try to raise money among the diaspora. So yes, of course, I strongly believe in it. Yeah, of course. It is. I think it is essential. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think we're nearing towards the end. I don't know, Professor Madika, if you have some final comments, either in English or in French. Or,
Thank you.
yes. Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you very much for your comments. We will take these into account for the future events also.
That's
Thank you very much.